You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Terminator gives us Salvation from Judgment Day. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas, and you are the Resistance.
And I'm Thomas Mariani, and I know now why you pod, but it is something I can never do.
Oh boy.
A Schwarzenegger podcast would be pretty awful, I would say. Or the best thing.
Just him doing a podcast? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, ridiculous.
If you've seen any of his audio commentaries, they are great for all the wrong reasons, for sure.
Hmm?
But, Adam, we're not the only ones here, because we have a guest here for the evening. He does some, film talk on his YouTube channel, and he's a guy I've met on another podcast, and he's a pretty swell dude. It is Mr. Mel Gore. Mel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I don't have a funny line from any of the Terminator movies to recite here, because I was unprepared.
We didn't either. It's fine. We really didn't. But Mel, welcome on, and I invited you onto the show after I met you on friend of the show, Rafe Telsh's Have Not Seen This Podcast, and I gave you a list of topics like I do most of the guests, and you jumped on to this one we're doing today, which is about the Terminator franchise in honor of Terminator 2 is turning 30 this particular week we're releasing this. And why Terminator in particular? What fascinates you about this franchise?
Before I even answer that question, I have to address the fact that I have never felt older in my life than I do right now. Terminator 2 is 30 years old? Is that what that's happened?
It's happening shortly.
Oh my gosh. I've lived too long. I love some of these movies. I absolutely adore them. I couldn't believe when I saw that list that this one hadn't got snatched up already. So yeah, I wanted it hardcore. It's one of those film franchises, the first 2 anyway, that just kind of defined who I am as a storyteller. Like it was really like very formative for me. So I have a long history with it.
Terminator, obviously the first 2. The first Terminator coming out in 1984 was this interesting new spark of science fiction cinema. And then it was followed up 7 years later with another one. Obviously both helped to really strengthen James Cameron's career as such a big thing, with obviously Terminator being the first big movie he did after Piranha 2, The Spawning, which we've covered on the show previously. It's so interesting, especially with this franchise, how it starts off so wonderfully with those 2 movies. And we'll talk about at least one of them as our good pick, as we'll get into later. And then just how much afterward the franchise is so desperate to keep things going for as long as it can. It's just this weird trouble when you have 2 films that mirror each other and complement each other so perfectly, and this particular the second one ends everything so well, and they're just like, oh, we gotta keep this going somehow.
Yeah, as Bilbo Baggins would say, it's like butter spread across too much toast.
Oh, good lord, they've tried so much to get this to work. I mean, Adam, you would obviously agree with all that. I know, given we've talked about your love of Schwarzenegger and stuff like that, you're a big fan of Terminator, even for as weird as the franchise gets.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I love Terminator. I love Schwarzenegger. T1 and 2 were huge movies in my, sort of childhood as well. I mean, I remember seeing Terminator 2. I want to say I saw it at the show. I should have, but, whatever. But I remember seeing it and just like being blown away by it. Like, what is this? I remember that when the trailer came out, how excited everyone was about it. Like, it was a huge, huge deal. And then, the rest of the movies happened. and the rides and the toys and the sort of all the license things and the television series and all that stuff. And yet still, as much as I know, any new property that has the name Terminator attached to it is probably going to be bad. I'm still going to see it. I'm still going to fork money over towards it. That's how much, the franchise as a whole does definitely mean to me.
And they're counting on that too.
Oh, 1,000%. Same thing with like Predator. They're not going to be good, but I'm going to watch them.
But that's what's so interesting also about just Terminator is the they you're questioning, because it's also the franchise that has changed so many hands over the course of like the 30 plus years since the original Terminator, where like the original company made the first Terminator went bankrupt, and so it ended up becoming like a Universal kind of thing, but then they lost the rights, and then like it went over to so many different things. That's why if you try and watch these movies on a streaming service, it's like, oh, the first one's on Prime, 3 and 4 are on HBO Max, and like Dark Fate is on Hulu and other shit like that, just because it's changed so many hands, because it's definitely a thing like people think they can make a huge franchise out of this story, but really aside from those first 2 movies, you can't. And what do you think, Mel, is the big thing that makes making a franchise out of such a popular, especially first 2 movies, so difficult onward?
I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that the bar was set so high. I mean, the first one, like I love the first one. I am like, in some regards, I even feel like the first one is superior to Judgment Day, but that's a whole nother conversation. I just feel like when the bar is set that high, all you really can do is meet expectations, or you can embarrass yourself. And the odds are like 70-30 that you're gonna embarrass yourself. Terminator 2 was a win. Be happy with that.
No, but we can't be happy with that. No, we can't. we have to at least wait several years and then do another one. Because like Terminator is one of those franchises where it's just like there's so many different like reboots and retcons. Like no, the only franchise I can really think of to compare it to is like Halloween, where that also is another example of just like, oh, such a great start, and then how many times just like, well, this is a reboot here, and this one kind of follows the continuity from the first 2 movies, but we're not going to do anything with that. We're going to actually follow the continuity just from the first movie now. It just has this weird timeline thing that just like sprawls out like a weird spider web.
But that's why we love it, right? Right, guys? Right?
I'm just here for the robots.
That's why, at least I'll say this, I'm always fascinated. Because, like, Terminator, like, somebody getting on the horse of Terminator is kind of like watching one of those, like, mechanical bull rides. Which is like, how long are you going to last on this? How long is this going to go, and how embarrassing is the fall going to be after a certain point? And, many have tried, so we'll be talking about that with our 2 movies, in case you're new to the show. Every week, Adam and I pick a random good and bad feature for our double feature. So, for Terminator, at the end of our last episode, Adam had the 2 good picks, and we ended up with Terminator 2. And then I had the bad picks, and we ended up with Terminator Salvation, both of which there's a lot to talk about. So we might as well just step in immediately to our first feature, Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
10 years ago, a machine from the future was sent to kill Sarah Connor. It failed.
I'll be back.
But this time, there are 2. One programmed to destroy, the other to protect.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Rated R. Starts Wednesday, July 3rd at a theater near you.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day came out July 2nd, 1991, as I said. 30th anniversary is coming up. And was directed by James Cameron, who directed the original movie. And he also co-wrote it with William Weischer. And it's so interesting because this is another example of a sequel coming so late after the original movie, where 84 to 91 is a 7-year difference. And it's like many times in James Cameron's career where everyone would be like, oh, isn't it such a huge budget? It cost $102 million for 1991. And like, how can you really follow up that original movie? It just feels like a fool's errand. And he, like many times he has done, proved them all wrong for doubting James Cameron. How dare you doubt James Cameron? Mel, what was your experience, especially with seeing this for the first time? And do you agree with the general consensus of it's an action masterpiece?
I was too young to see this in the theater. I actually started working at a movie theater 2 years after this came out. I kind of pulled a Star Wars on this. I watched it completely out of order. I saw Terminator 2 first, like on VHS. and didn't know like the backstory. All I knew is that it was awesome. I didn't know quite why, but I knew it was amazing. And then like a few years later, I got around to seeing the first one, and was able to kind of like finally put things together. That's not the best way to do it, is it? It's like with the Mega Man games. Like everyone you meet played Mega Man 2 before they played Mega Man 1. But that was just kind of my experience.
I think it's an experience for a lot of people. That was definitely mine, where admitting I was not around for Terminator 2 being in theaters, but my dad ended up showing it to me later, and I just remember especially watching this one and being so amazed. And it's a classic case of like I realized like, well, this is a 2, right? There's a 1. He's like, I don't know if I should show you that. There's like some sexual stuff, which he's referencing the tamest sex scene in cinema in the original Terminator that's barely any kind of problem. Keeping in mind that I could watch this movie where horrible gore happens. This R-rated, very bloody, violent movie. Just like, yeah, sure. He rips off his arm and he's got like a bloody robot arm. Everyone's terrified. It's fine. Adam, did you have a similar experience? Did you see Terminator 2 first or the first one?
Man, I think I saw the first one first, and you got to figure I was like 9 pushing 10 when this came out. It's part 2, and I shouldn't have seen it in the theater, but my dad took me to all these movies and stuff. I want to say I saw the first one before this, because I remember the trailer for Terminator 2 thinking that Arnold was still the bad Terminator, and that, you know, the cop, because all you just see is flashes of Robert Patrick and the gear with the badge on, was a good like Terminator from the future. And I always thought that was how it was going to go. So I had to have seen the first one before this. Picking between the two of them is really difficult for me because they are so different in tone. The first one's basically like a Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers slasher, one relentless killer. And then this one is, you know, sci-fi action perfection. And, you know, it reminds me even like, you know, where James Cameron took over Aliens. There's as much of a difference between Aliens and Alien as there is in Terminator 2 and Terminator. So I love them both equally, but man, Terminator 2, like I said right in the beginning, it blew my mind, dude. The visual effects, everything. You know, and then you're watching this crazed liquid metal killing thing chasing children. And I mean, it was terrifying. It was thrilling. It's kind of the perfect summer blockbuster, maybe ever.
Yeah, it was very, very revolutionary at the time. Obviously, the big thing is sort of the visual effects stuff, where this is one of the more groundbreaking uses of CG. Even though, interestingly, I found out, much like any of your favorite movies that ground broke with CG, like a Jurassic Park or anything like that, not a lot of the CG in there. The CG actually only amounts to 5 minutes of screen time, which is stellar. Because this is a great example of like the late great Stan Winston combining not just those computer effects, but also like the practical stuff and just the actual actors being able to do stuff, some optical effects. It's one of those great movies from around this particular era that didn't just rest on the laurels of CG and fully just embrace like, well, it's the best tool for this particular scene, but there are other tools we can use that can accomplish so many of the other things afterward.
You know, and that's kind of Cameron's thing, dude. I mean, look at The Abyss. You know what I mean? Everybody remembers that water worm and all that stuff. That's really the only CG in The Abyss. They're all like scale models and minis and things like that, and all practical. But everybody remembers, you know, as a really CGI heavy thing, and it's really not. That water worm thing and is in it for 2 minutes.
This is one of those scenarios where I have to get on my old man soapbox for just a minute here, even though I hate to do that. I don't like to be that guy, you know, with the kids and the hair and the music. But I do miss a little bit that era of, yeah, here's an amazing effect. Here are some amazing effects, but we're not going to drown you in them. We're going to tease them out. They go so long in the movie between showing you these kind of like new amazing things. Like every time the T-1000 shows up, it does something a little new, a little more exciting, a little more like bombastic, until, you know, the end, when he's just, you know, he's huge holes in his head and he turns into like that thing from The Thing at the end when he gets blown up, and he's just got like parts everywhere. Like they really do build up nicely to all of those kind of moments. Whereas now in every action sequence kind of plays at the same intensity. versus the buildup in T2 that works so well.
Yeah, where it definitely manages to use like big practical things, like especially climax. It always like astonishes me how they're able to do like, oh, here's a giant Mack truck being chased by a fucking helicopter underneath a fucking bridge. Like all that stuff is like still so tremendous to me, and most of it is practical. Aside from some, some of like the optical stuff and just great stunt work, all sorts of great stuff being in here. But also, of course, there's our characters and stuff. How do you feel, Mel, this does as like an actual sequel to the original movie with like progressing some of the characters like Linda Hamilton and Sarah Connor, or even this version of the Terminator? How do you feel like this is the great example of like how to continue a story?
I think it both is and isn't, and that may be blasphemy of me to say. The first one is kind of perfect in how the loop. Anytime you deal with time travel, you've always got that one guy in the audience who's just got like a notepad and a pencil out, and he's just like, no, that's wrong, that's not how that works. The first one, the loop is perfect because it closes. The loop in Terminator 2 does require a little more suspension of disbelief because it effectively tells you that Skynet invented itself. I can let that go a little bit, but it is a bit of a stretch for me in that regard. Did not stop me from loving it one bit. As far as Linda Hamilton's character goes, as far as Sarah Connor goes, I think James Cameron kind of loves to do that. He loves to put his female characters, especially, kind of in a hole, in a deep dark hole, and watch them climb out of it. And it's very impressive, very thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, she went all in for that. The training regimen, which was like through the roof, and learning the weapons and like judo and all of that. And that all in service of the role. So no, I thought it was fantastic. I love the fact that her character arc is essentially that she'd be, for a moment, the thing she spent her whole life hating when she goes to kill Miles Dyson and realizes that she's now the enemy. She's now become this soulless thing, and it takes the love of her son to pull her back. I love all that stuff. I love all the stuff about how she spent all those years searching for the perfect father for John, to fight against these things that she hates, only for the thing she hates most to be that ideal father. It's not subtle, but it is beautiful.
Yeah, I like the fact that it really is sort of building on the idea of like what you're talking about with like the causality loops and whatnot, the time travel like paradoxes that are going on. Linda Hamilton is so dead set on like trying to find the specific way for John to become the eventual savior, that I like the fact that it becomes like much more of like this natural thing that occurs in with like the time travel coming into it. She's trying to find something in the natural world that will end up like making John this like great leader he'll end up being, when it's just like, no, it's a combination of like what you gave him, the tools you gave him when he was younger, but also the influence of the Terminator at the same time. It's just, I love the way that all that progresses. And
Sarah Connor's sort of growth and what they decided to do with the character from the first one to this one, and even Lena Headey's portrayal of it in the TV show, I just love the idea that this 17, 18-year-old waitress from the first movie becomes, as she says in the first movie, the mother of the future. And I mean, she just is a balls to the wall sociopath for the most part. I mean, she's kind of lost her mind because of what happened to her, and she's ultra paranoid and stuff. Well, that's probably for a good reason. And I just, yeah, and you said it really well there, Mel, at the scene when she's about to execute Dyson, and she sort of just sees Danny on him, holding him and everything, and she realizes she's literally become the monster. And she has become the killing machine that she's tried to protect her son from and warn everybody about, forever. And it's just such a great, great moment for her. And her best showcase of her acting, I'd argue, in any of the films is that one scene. And it's pretty spectacular. And I don't mind the sort of flip that they do with the T-800. I remember as a kid thinking it was kind of dumb, like, why is he the good guy now and why does he look the same? But I didn't understand, that's just the general model. They all look like that. As you get older, oh, of course. And I think it's fine. I do think there are some cheesy moments. Thomas, you quoted one in the very beginning. I know now why you cry. And the fucking thumbs up at the end when his body's already burning, yet you can still do a thumbs up. Like, get the fuck on. But if there wasn't these moments, if they wouldn't have gone, with this growth, I don't think this movie would be nearly as successful as it came to be. If he just redid Terminator 1, then what would be the point? It'd be watching, like you said earlier as well, Thomas, it'd be like watching Halloween 2, like just more of the same. So, yeah, I think it was a ballsy move the way they did it, and the way he decided to approach his own material and completely change it from the get. And, obviously it worked out. That's the one thing you can say about James Cameron. The dude's ballsy. He doesn't give a fuck. He does things how he wants to do it. And, whether or not it's true, he knows best.
Fingers crossed for Avatar 2.
It's just very different. I concur. Hopefully it's very different from the first movie. But yeah, I think that's what's so interesting really for me with like Terminator 2, especially as a sequel to the first movie, is how much it really does like act as the perfect mirror image. I think that's why it's so hard to do a sequel after this point, is like these two movies complement themselves so well as like sort of bookends for each other with how much they like revisit certain things from the earlier movie, or even just like add certain elements that feel like perfect to add, like even like the T-800. I think it's such a great job where even though I knew watching this movie Arnold's probably going to be the good guy because I'd seen other Arnold movies before this, but like if you don't know that going in, you only have the knowledge of the first movie. The first like 30 minutes or so before like they actually meet up with John are so tense. We're just like, oh my god, so who is actually the good or bad guy here? Or even as I mentioned, they're kind of getting you toward maybe Robert Patrick because he's an authority figure and a cop, even though this movie ends up pulling the original ACAB because they make him the most terrifying creature that's ever existed by the end of it. And I think it's such a great compliment also, like with the T-800 being like this one that kind of starts to learn a bit more compared to the original one. It's more of like being empathetic as much as it can be versus the T-1000 as well. Before we even get to like Robert Patrick and all that stuff, we should definitely say, I would argue my favorite Arnold movie, as we've discussed on the show previously, is probably Total Recall, but this is like the iconic image of Arnold is in this movie. Like even the poster knew that coming out. It's just like, no, this is it. This is exactly what you think of Arnold when you think of him. It's the poster of like T2 with him in that leather jacket, him just standing there. It's him at his sort of zenith as a movie star.
If I can, I want to go back just for a second and talk about the reveal and how they hid from the audiences, from the world. I swear, you could not release this movie today because that secret would have been leaked on the internet just like forever ago. Like it just, they would have to rewritten a whole new ending and a new plot line, and it would have been terrible just because you can't keep secrets anymore. But I love like part of John Connor's storyline in that is that he thinks his mom's nuts because she's just been preaching this gospel of savior of the future to him his whole life. And he thought it was all just garbage, just nothing to believe in. And the moment when he comes face to face with everything he's ever been told by her about the Terminator in the hallway, that is such an amazing moment. It's like so many thoughts have to be going through his head at that moment. Like everything she ever said is true. Here's this guy. And you as an audience member at the time, like you're as scared as he is because you're just like, oh God, this is it. Like, how does he escape? And then that flip comes, that amazing reversal where it's Robert Patrick who ends up being the bad guy, which is another thing you could not get away with. You said it before, he was the original ACAB. You couldn't get away with that now. Guy shows up in a police uniform in a movie now, and immediately you're just like, well, don't trust that guy, which is awful, but I mean, true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you guys saying, but I think it's kind of obvious right off the bat that it's Robert Patrick is the bad one. Arnold, he goes into that bar and beats the shit out of those bikers and everything, but they do the Bad to the Bone song and they do all this stuff, and then Robert Patrick shows up and guts a police officer. It takes his outfit and gun. I mean, it's pretty, I think right away, as soon as the two are revealed, you know exactly which one is which. I never saw it as like a twist. I thought it was pretty like dead ass out in the open.
I don't know how much of it is also because like even like Mel was saying like, oh, you wouldn't be able to reveal this twist. I watched a lot of marketing material for this movie, and they do outright say there's a big twist here where now Arnold is the good guy versus Robert Patrick. They were teasing that a lot in the marketing and all this other stuff. I remember watching this for the first time and feeling a bit of that like confusion about that, even though like obviously I knew Arnold was like a hero in most things. There was a bit of that doubt for a second of like who could be who. I think the movie does a pretty good job of like trying to like contrast those two, and I think I agree. I believe that worry on Edward Furlong's face, which I think this is another thing that also divides people. Is Edward Furlong good in this movie?
No.
Is Edward Furlong good at all?
No.
He has his moments, I think, in this, but he's. I chalk some of it up to him being a kid. Like kids are just inherently kind of annoying to me. So I don't get too much mileage out of them. I remember the thing that scared me most about his performance. There's that moment in the parking lot when, before he finds out about his either right before or right after he finds out about his foster parents being killed, and he discovers that the Terminator has to do everything he says. And at this point in the film, we had seen him mouth off to his stepmom and stepdad. We have seen him rob an ATM. The kid's kind of a dick. But as soon as you find out that he can control a Terminator, I was so terrified as a viewer because I was like, oh no, is this gonna be 90 minutes of him just like making the Terminator go around and like steal him like ice cream in video games and busting open more ATMs? Like I was so terrified that was the turn that the movie was going to take, and he was going to have to like have like some kind of life lesson where he's like, with a giant robot comes great responsibility, so I should be a better human being. Thankfully that didn't happen.
No, that's true. They just go for more of like that's an initial kind of childish spark. But then I like the fact that he ends up realizing that it's like, oh no, I have like a killer monster robot around. I could like seriously hurt people. And he like that responsibility really weighs on him. I think for me, because we've talked about Edward Furlong weirdly a lot recently. Because we
back to back on episodes, we talked about Edward Furlong.
That's true, because we talked about The Crow, Wicked Prayer, and Brain Scan, which are both very different. Yeah. But I think
Brain Scan!
Edward Furlong, much like the special effects stuff in this movie, is a tool that needs to be used appropriately. And I think not just James Cameron, but also the other actors, I think, know how to like get the right reaction off of him, or go back and forth from him, or even just like get him to do the right thing at the right time. Kind of like when you train an animal on a set to do things. They know how to like jingle the keys right here. I'm sorry, Mr. Furlong, if you're listening. I hope you aren't. You need some help, please. But with him in this movie, I think they know how to use him appropriately. I think particularly like I love all the stuff in Mexico where it's him and Arnold interacting with each other, and especially like, doing the high fives and stuff like that, and Arnold's like so slow to react and everything. I think like they know how to use him well in this movie and get like the right things that work perfectly for this. Obviously a lot of people wouldn't be able to do that later, and I think it also he went through puberty during this movie, and you can tell in various scenes they're like, okay, he looks way too small compared to like the start of the movie in certain scenes, and they dub over a lot of his vocals because he was like his voice was cracking and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that hamper him potentially, but I think they do as good a job as you can with, like I said, the tool that they are given.
I just love the idea that there's a fucking Edward Furlong wrangler on set. Edward Furlong, come stand here. Edward Furlong, come stand here. Boy, he's like, what?
Good Edward. Good Edward.
Nah, dude, he annoyed me as a kid. He annoys me now. He was the biggest sort of issue for me then. He's the biggest issue for me now. Even though as a kid, I probably didn't recognize enough, but like, you know, my older brothers, my dad, everyone was like, oh my God, that fucking kid is terrible. So I was like, yeah, fuck that kid. I don't like that, but still. Yeah, man, he's just the weakest link for me, man. This whiny little brat. He drives me fucking crazy. She's not my mother, Todd. Like, get the fuck out of here, man. Nope, never did it for me. Still doesn't. I don't like Edward Furlong. Never will. Not changing my mind. Don't even try.
part of that is just the John Connor character, which I think another big problem with this franchise is they never quite knew how to work with John Connor as a character. And I think the only reason it works as much for this movie is because, oh yeah, he's annoying and whatever, but he's also playing like this 12-year-old bratty kid who rides a dirt bike and is friends with Danny Cooksey, aka the embodiment of early 90s Nickelodeon. Just right along with them. Like, of course he's gonna kind of be like a little arrogant asshole, and I think they do a good job like playing that, because I think that's just the most interesting thing you can do with John Connor. Because after this point, you just have him be like, oh, he's the savior. He's like, it's kind of like doing a Jesus movie, where it's like, oh, if you try and like have some way to work with him as like some kind of complex 3-dimensional character, and John Connor, just as the mythology portrays, is not that. He's a MacGuffin. Which is why I think Dark Fate is new. Like, let's just get rid of him. Like, there's nothing we can do at this point.
I just want to know what happened to Danny Cooksey's character. Like, he disappears at the Galleria whenever the T-1000 pushes him down. It, like, pushes him into the side of an Afterburner game, and then you don't see him again. I was hoping that there would be more cameos by Tiny Toon Adventures voice actors in the movie.
Everybody pops up. John Kassir. Don Messick, everybody shows up.
Charlie Adler.
Charlie Adler. Yes, for sure. But we gotta talk a bit more about, obviously, we mentioned him many times, but Robert Patrick's performance as the T-1000 is arguably one of the best screen villains, just ever. Especially, as you mentioned, he kind of has this initial appearance that's just like, oh, he's like kind of this slimy dude, but at the same time he has a sense of authority, so everyone doesn't question him. And then as things go along, especially the way he runs, which, for the record, notice how Tom Cruise is like so praised for like, oh man, he loves to run. Notice how he didn't run quite that way until after 1991. If you watch any of his earlier movies, he didn't do it. I'm just saying, I think he took some hints from Robert Patrick. I would definitely argue.
Coincidence?
I think not, sir. But do you agree, Mel, that Robert Patrick's dope in this?
I thought you were going to ask me, do I agree that Robert Patrick runs better than anyone second to Usain Bolt, maybe? He's so good. He's just so stone cold. Okay, I'll tell you what. You know how you know he's going to be cool in this? It's the scene when the police car pulls up to the foster parents' house. And he walks up to the door and he's talking to the insidious Xander Berkeley, and I always introduce him as the insidious Xander Berkeley. I don't know why I just do that. He's talking to them, and they say, does this have anything to do with, there was another guy this morning, a big guy on a bike who was looking for him. And Robert Patrick just goes, nah, I wouldn't worry about him. That is so badass. Like, that is, as a writer, that, and as an audience member, as a viewer, that I love it. I love that kind of stuff. I just, the confidence he exudes, it's like you know you're in for. Who's that confident going up against a cybernetic killing machine? But another cybernetic killing machine. But yeah, so great in this.
Not to take anything away from Arnold, but I think it might be the best Terminator on screen ever. I love Arnold, especially in the first one, with the way he sort of scans the environment, moves his eyes and his neck, and just everything about him. I love him in this one, but man, Robert Patrick is just chilling to the fucking bone. He's so terrifying yet so charismatic, especially in that scene you just brought up, Mel, where he's at the door and he's talking to him. And I mean, just the way he's looking at them, and when they give him the picture, the way he's charming the pants off him. Oh, he's a good looking boy. Mind if I keep this picture? And you're like, oh, this fucking psychopath. And yeah, he's incredible. There's never a moment where he doesn't feel like a real threat. Like, he could win and get John and kill Sarah and kill the T-800 at almost any moment. You get the impression that it's literally by sheer luck that they keep evading and surviving against him. Yeah, he's literally the shark in the water. He's the unstoppable force of, death and destruction that the Terminator should be.
Yeah, he's everything I want. He's everything I want in a villain. He has, talking about his mannerisms, there's something he does that I love. Whenever he injures and kills people, there are all these moments where like he puts when he's disguised as the foster mom and he puts the knife through Xander Berkeley's head. There's this moment where he studies Xander Berkeley. Whenever he stabs the guard, the twin, Dan or Don Stanton, whichever one it is, whenever he stabs the guard in the eye in the hospital, he studies him. He studies Sarah Connor whenever he stabs her in the shoulder. I love that he's like a surgeon. It's like, as good as he is, he's still he's like, is there a more efficient way to hurt you? Is there a better way to kill you? Can I figure that out? Can I be a better murder machine than I already am? And I love that concentration that's always on him. He's always working.
I think particularly with the fact that he doesn't speak nearly as much as Arnold does. I think that's what adds to that efficiency. It's so much more about, like, let me portray this with as much physical movement and as limited amount of words as I can do. Like when he gets into the helicopter and just says, "Get out," and the guy leaves. Perfect. Or even like when like Arnold, I think, hits him during the big warehouse thing, and then his head turns and he just does the finger wag. Like, no, you shouldn't do that. No. I think that's what it's like. He's so confident he doesn't need to use a lot of words. He doesn't need to do a lot. I think that's what compares him so perfectly to Arnold, who does like so many of the big lines, like "Hasta la vista, baby," and all this other stuff. That makes him great and charismatic, but the complete contrast to that is a cold, calculated killing machine that doesn't say a lot. And it's just like, let me do this the most efficient way I possibly can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But we're going a while on Terminator 2, so we might want to start wrapping up. But I want to ask everybody, what is your favorite action sequence in here? This is a big action movie everybody loves. What's everyone's favorite big action beat? Mel?
For me, it's like two action sequences put together, honestly, because it's got some of my favorite stunt work. They're in the police van leaving Cyberdyne, and the T-1000 is in the helicopter. That chase, that culminates with the helicopter crashing into, like, they slam on the brakes and the helicopter smashes into the back of the truck, which is such a great, I don't even know it's a stunt, but inanimate objects just smashing into each other. I love that. And that action sequence evolves into the liquid nitrogen truck, which features my favorite single moment when Arnold climbs out of the cab of the pickup truck, runs across the flatbed up onto the hood, and fires the machine gun through the window and through the windshield and just riddles the T-1000 with bullets. All of that up to when he turns the wheel, flips the 18-wheeler over, and it crashes into the refinery. That's action perfected. It's so well staged. It's most of it is practical. There's a couple of blue screen shots in there that haven't aged terribly well, but it's so good and it's so pulse pounding, and it's just white knuckle edge of your seat stuff. It's a cliche to say it, but I watched that movie 100 times and I'm still holding my breath. I notice that I'm holding my breath whenever I watch those two scenes.
Adam, what about yours?
As far as like what the fuck is about to happen, it's the sort of lead up to the mall hallway scene where they're both coming from opposite ends. Arnold with the roses, and then him finding the Terminator, talking to a young Nikki Cox and everything like that. The look on John's face, and then the ultimate where you get the breath of, oh shit, Arnold is the good guy, that get down, and then you're like, oh fuck. Like, it's just, what a great, tense little moment.
Shout out to Arnold and Robert Patrick throwing themselves through walls like wrestler style. After that point, just like, they are destroying that fucking facility. Also, that one dude who's just walking by like, hey kid, what are you doing down here? Oh no, I'm dead.
They even shot his can of Coke.
R.I.P. that can of Coke. So young. But I also really love, besides that sequence, it's actually the follow-up to Adam's sequence, where it's the Robert Patrick chasing after Edward Furlong on his bike, and leading to like them in the middle of, I forgot what that place in LA is called, like that big ravine, but with like the fucking giant pickup truck as it's like chasing them down. Arnold's got like the shotgun that's like revolving and all sort of stuff. That's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of Arnold being like at his perfect zenith as a movie star. It's like him on that bike and him turning around, just like cocking his gun, shooting, and then like turning the gun around, wheeling it is like so good, down to even the big explosion followed by like the first big sequence where the T-1000 is like metal forming like from the fire is so good. Like, all of these action sequences are great, but I think that's the sequence that where the movie sort of makes its official statement about, like, this is the kind of action movie we're gonna be. And it's so dope. But, like I said, we've been going a bit long, so let's do some quick final thoughts on T2. Mel, your quick final thoughts on it.
This kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. This is how sequels are done. This, Aliens, The Godfather Part 2, The Bourne Supremacy, this is how you do a sequel. You build on everything that's been established, but without succumbing to spectacle, and also without betraying any of the groundwork that's already been laid. I think it's a really solid transition, and definitely just sets the bar. It's one of those sequels that sets the bar for how sequels should be done. I've studied that movie for years. I will continue to study it. I learn something new every time I watch it.
Adam.
I mean, I echo pretty much everything Mel just said. You know, when you think about the great pantheon of just sequels, there's a few that pop in mind. You know, like Empire Strikes Back, and you know, even Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, and things like that. But Terminator 2 is always in that conversation as well. It's earned that right to be in that sort of list and amongst those great movies, because it's sci-fi action perfection. It is the sort of prototypical and just the greatest example of a summer blockbuster movie, you know, at least in my lifetime, that I can think of. It's phenomenal. It had word of mouth, it had star power, it has a great script, great effects, great acting, everything. There's, you know, other than fucking Edward Furlong, there's hard to take anything bad about this movie. It's basically a perfect movie.
Yeah, I echo everything both of you have said, and I'll just, like, add that I think what also works is, like, we could talk about this movie for so long, because there's so much that I would love to, like, go into detail about, like, underrated MVP Joe Morton as Miles Dyson, who is so good and has the best breathing in any fucking movie of all time. I can't hold on to this much longer. So good, so wonderful. Or even stuff like Brad Fiddel's score, which, like, he's following up the first movie, and particularly his T-1000 theme with the it's like this weird, like, metal stretching sound. So good. Like, there's so much detail in this. Like Mel said, like, you can spot so much stuff, like, that you didn't even see the first time, or even just appreciate. Like, even like the big Linda Hamilton's dream sequence, like the nuclear holocaust, is one of the most terrifying things I've seen in a movie ever. It's just like one of the most horrific examples, just like, oh my god, this actual thing that might be able to happen. And from all the nuclear scientists who apparently saw this movie said, like, no, that's extremely accurate. Great, guys. Thank you for confirming that all my nightmares could come true at any point. But yeah, it is a stellar movie that I would say I slightly prefer to the original movie, but it's also like they're both like near perfect movies. They're so close to each other, unlike maybe some other entries in the franchise. So why don't we go ahead and we'll get into that second feature in just a moment. But first, here's a promo for an ESO show you can queue up right after hours.
So, Brittany, Martha, tell me about your podcast.
Oh, no. It's like we're in sync, but also kind of a disaster.
We are always a disaster.
So our podcast is fun if you want to hear two people talk about and complain about stuff that they love and also hate.
And drink.
And drink.
And the show is called...
Oh. But first, let's talk nerdy.
And you can find us on the ESO network. Ba-ding.
See you next Tuesday.
And now, let's get into Terminator Salvation.
I thought I knew our enemy. We are outnumbered by machines. But this is not the future my mother warned me about. Win or lose, this war ends tonight.
If we stay the course, we are dead! We are all dead! Come on!
Terminator Salvation in theaters May 21st.
No.
I know now why you cry, and it's something I will also do. So, yes, Terminator Salvation came out May 21st, 2009, the fourth entry in the franchise, which I guess we should briefly mention that, like, in between this and T2, there had been mostly a gap without much, except for T2 The Ride, the 3D thing at Universal, which for the record is dope, and also directed by James Cameron. R.I.P. also to that. And then T3, which had come out and was more just like, we're gonna kind of do the first two movies again, but not nearly as well. I rewatched that movie recently. I would argue it's very forgettable, but I think it's more inoffensive than anything to me, and has a few interesting bits and pieces. But then Terminator Salvation comes out, and I was very much following and very curious about this movie when it was going to come out, because it does sort of the thing that everyone had kind of been saying for a while, like, oh, if you're going to do another Terminator movie, why not follow the actual Future War stuff that we see only glimpses of in the first two movies? Why don't we see more of that and John Connor as an actual hero? And I think that's a good idea in theory. I just think this particular movie is a terrible execution of it. Mel, would you agree or not with that?
I would agree that it is terrible. It is horrible. And I was super excited whenever it came out that they were going to do it this way, because I'm one of those people who's like with Star Wars, there are like these gaps between each Star Wars movie. As far as like just the chronology of the characters goes. And the most interesting gap to me was always the gap between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. There's like, 16, 18 years or something in there, and there's just room to play. And it's for a writer, it's a dream to be able to just run amok in that time frame. And Terminator's the same way. We know all about, Judgment Day. And yes, John Connor teaches them how to fight the machines, and that leads you to the first movie, and then T2. But yeah, let's play around in that gap where the war is on. I mean, there's so much potential there, and they squandered all of it.
Well, I'm very curious because Adam, you'd intimated to me previously that you maybe don't agree with that particular point of view, and is that still the case?
Hold on to your nuts and your butts. I'm still a pretty big fan of this movie, man. I still actually really, really like this movie. Is it top tier Terminator? No, of course not. We just talked about that one and then the first one. But I would put this right up there, man. And also, I just want to add, there was also the Sarah Connor Chronicles before this movie came out. So we also had the TV. No, I actually really do like this movie. Now, I do prefer the director's cut version of it quite a bit more. I don't know if either of you have seen the director's cut version.
I have not.
No.
Okay, director's cut version, the opening with Worthington and Helena Bonham Carter is not in it. It doesn't open with that. It opens right at the war. And you first see Marcus when he crawls out of the hole. So you have no idea who he is. You have no idea about, he was from the past or anything. You honestly have no idea. And to me, that should have probably been left in. I think that would have added a lot more to it. But I still think it's a pretty fun movie, man. I do think also that the trailer sort of right away revealing that Marcus was a Terminator was a huge, huge mistake. I mean, you would have got it anyways, but still, why just tell everybody? But I like the look of everything. I like the look of the T-600s. I like the look of the big machines. I really like Anton Yelchin as young Kyle Reese. Once Christian Bale stops doing the growl voice and actually starts using a normal sort of speaking voice near the end, he's really good. Worthington's a wet blanket, always has been, always will be. But I still think it's a pretty good action movie. I don't understand what people might have really wanted. You wanted the future war. Well, they gave it to you. Maybe not the version you were expecting, but it's there. This is the sort of the beginning of the war where John Connor's not even a high ranking guy. They're still using bullets. They don't even have laser technology yet or anything like they do that you sort of see in the sort of flashbacks in Terminator 2 or Terminator 1. This is the very, very beginning. I just think it's fun. I like it. I like the setup. I like that he's, sort of got his followers because he can sort of prophesize, but yet, the higher up thinks he's full of shit. I just think it works, man. I don't know. I mean, I know a couple people who like it, but not a lot.
I'll say as much that I agree that I think that some of those things you're talking about, I think, have a lot of potential to them. I think I would agree particularly with Anton Yelchin, who I think is definitely the best part of this movie. It's a trouble that him, as the most interesting character, is reduced to just kind of being this goal point for everyone to go to, and everyone else around him is, what's the word? Fucking bland and awful. I believe that's the word I would refer to with that, because, like, the version of John Connor here is the epitome of everything I'm talking about with how bland a character he is as an idea. Because the way they present him here is so much more of just like, oh, he's the, I guess, good guy, quote-unquote, the strategist of sorts who, like, influences all these people, inspires people, but Bale is so checked out. I would argue even, like, after he's doing the big gruff voice or before, whatever, he is so completely checked out of this movie, and I don't believe for a second he's a military leader of any sort. He has no charisma of any kind, and every time he does his big rousing speeches, it feels like he's just phoning it entirely. And more importantly, they spend so much time with this fucking Marcus Wright character, who, regardless of, like, Sam Worthington not being, like, that compelling a presence, is this weird fucking, like, Mary Sue kind of character who comes in just like, oh, I'm the guy who's gonna connect everything in the Terminator franchise. Well, what about, like, your character? I'm a robot, it turns out. Anything else? I can, like, make a radio work. You got anything else, buddy? Is there anything else? No. I'm sorry, no. I think that's the big thing. It's just like, it is such a pale, poor execution of everything you're talking about to me. Even like most of the action sequence, all this other stuff. I just think it does not the worst job of this franchise, but near the bottom to me with that. Is that your general thing as well with it, Mel?
I yes, and I will also say that that's going to be the title of my autobiography. I'm a robot, as it turns out. I think I'm going to go. This came out during the writer's strike, didn't it?
The production of it, yeah.
That I blame a lot of that on the problem, because the movie feels to me like it wants to be about four different things, and all four ideas are good, but all four ideas are also half baked. If they had focused on any one of those ideas and carried them out to their full conclusion, I think it would have been better. I'm in love with the idea that John Connor has been told his whole life that he's going to be this great military leader, and when he finally reaches the time to do it, I like the idea that a lot of people just don't buy it. I think that's great. I think he has to. I like the idea that he would have to earn it. The movie doesn't quite do that. But I would have enjoyed seeing that, him actually having to step into those shoes for real, instead of everybody just, bowing down and being like, here's the chosen one. The idea of the hunt for Kyle Reese, I think that could have been cool, because like, what if Kyle Reese wasn't ready at all to go back in time and do this impossible task? What if the movie had just been about his arc, about him becoming brave enough and worthy enough to take on the kind of horrible honor of this suicide mission? If the movie had just been solely about the reveal of the T-800, that would have been very cool. If we had never known that it was leading up to that, and that was the big surprise at the end, that would have been great, instead of it being telegraphed so badly. There are all these different directions I would have loved for it to go. It kind of like dips its toe in the water in each of those storylines. The Marcus Wright character, don't fuck that guy. Get that guy out of there. That's like that one storyline that just doesn't help me at all. Like that's dead weight. And every time he's on screen, I just want the next thing to happen.
Yeah, I think particularly, even if I didn't know anything about the trailers going in, that like, oh, he's actually a robot, the moment you see that opening, it's just like, okay, so either he traveled in time somehow to the future, or he's like some kind of robot prototype. Those are the only two things that make any sense in this universe, if you have any kind of connection to Terminator. So either one of those is fucking dumb. Like, such a dumb fucking idea. Because, like, if you traveled through time, like, oh, so we're just completely dismissing any idea that, like, time travel was only one crucial thing that could happen in the future point to, like, get the other Terminators back to the past. And if he ends up actually being a Terminator, like he is ultimately in this, the trouble is you have to have somebody who's compelling, so when you find out he's a robot, that twist means something. It's like, oh, he's this character we've grown to know and love. Oh my god, he's actually a Terminator, and he's dealing with all the reckoning of that. And Sam Worthington is a fucking flat board of wood, who, from the start, is just like, oh, maybe he is a robot. That's the only thing that really makes sense for why you cast this guy.
Just to speak on something you said, Mel, about, if this would be sort of the Kyle Reese, sort of finding himself and proving that he's worthy for this great honor and all that. I'd argue we got that in the next movie, and it didn't work. Now, that also might be because it was also played by another plank of drywall, that is Jai Courtney. But we did get that. I mean, that did happen. The thing is about this movie, this is definitely one of those movies where anybody sort of gripes against it. I can't, sort of combat it or anything, because I completely understand. And I agree with a lot of it, especially the Marcus Wright stuff, because of Sam Worthington. But there's still just something about this movie. I don't know if it is sort of the fact that it takes place mostly in the daytime, and it's, it's just, I don't know, something about it. I still think, out of all the Terminator sequels we got past Part 2, I would still put this at the third, man. I still think this is the best one after Part 2. I really do. I think the rest are problematic for so many different reasons. Part 3, it's a carbon copy. Genesis is a horrible attempt at a fucking sort of retooling reboot. And Dark Fate, as much as you say, Thomas, killing John Connor, get the MacGuffin out of here, blah, blah, blah. These movies would not be anything without the John Connor sort of mythos. That was the whole setup for the very first movie. So to me, to kill him in the beginning of Dark Fate, it just feels like a sort of, I don't know. I feel like it's a cheap move. But whatever. Fuck me, right, guys?
I actually do agree with you on that. Because Terminator Genesis is the worst one.
Yes, we can all agree on that. It is the worst.
Oh, it's abysmal. Terminator Salvation, if I had to rank them, it is the third best Terminator movie for me, but it's the third best one in the same way that Predators is the second, maybe third best Predator movie. It's the gulf between T2 and or T1, depending on how you rank them. But the gulf between the first two and this one, it may be third, but it's such a big gulf for me. I blame McG. I blame McG for everything.
Yeah, I think my big problem is, like, even with, like, the action elements of it, it also is like, oh, like, why not just, like, embrace that it's, like, this dumb action movie? I feel like even the action sequences are mostly just kind of, like, very plain, aside from, like, I would say the one with the two motorcycles that, like, are self-automated. I like that one particular action sequence, but most of them are just a lot of, like, hey, it's just people covered in mud, and people are just like kind of like walking around. Once again, it feels like, compared to like the original other movies, it feels so much of just like, oh, we're kind of putting our action figures in place, and we're not really doing a lot to like get you invested in the drama. I think particularly the final fight in the factory is so poorly edited and so abysmally put together. I can barely tell like what even the fuck is going on at certain points. I just feel like, with few exceptions, I just think that even as an action movie, it is like such a poor attempt at like, oh my god, the distant future, and it pales in comparison to any of the brief shots we got in 1 or 2. They're like very small with models.
There's that scene in the first Terminator where Kyle Reese comes back from an op, and he's walking through this burned out bunker. In the background, you hear people crying, people are coughing, people are sick. You see 2 children are celebrating because they found a rat, which means they get to eat tonight. The future in Terminator Salvation is it's so much less bleak. It's still bleak, but it's less bleak than it should have been. I needed them to lean harder into just how dark that timeline was. Like I thought I was going to get more of that with like the prisoners herded into what I thought was going to be like one of those extermination camps that Reese talked about in the first film. I thought I was going to get more of that kind of World War II allegory, like kind of action that he kind of like alludes to in the first film, but the future just never quite got there. Children of Men is a more bleak future than the future in Terminator Salvation. I was always disappointed by how they missed the mark on that.
It's Mad Max cosplay more than an actual dystopian future, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But Adam, I'm sorry, you really want to rebut to all this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm fucking dying to. But again, it's the future from Terminator 1, Terminator 2 hasn't occurred yet. This is the build up to what it ultimately becomes. It's not like at the end of the movie the war's over, they won everything. No, it's going to continue. It's going to get way worse. Like this is sort of the start of it. This is the very beginning. Like I said, they're still using outdated technology. They're still using, there's a lot more humans that are alive now. They're still more organized and everything. They haven't been fucking almost wiped out to like extinction yet. It's coming though. This is, like I said, this is the setup for that. And one thing I do want to talk about, if I had to pick, other than Sam Worthington, the worst part of this movie, why is there a little fucking kid who can sense robots? Like, what the fuck is the point of that? That is the dumbest thing. And especially when she actually does it and they're like, oh no, she senses something. It's a fucking giant transformer-sized robot that's walking up on this little gas station. None of these assholes heard that? Like that to me is one of the weakest parts of this. Like to me, that is the big thing that really didn't work. And they really want you to care about sort of Kyle and this Star Girl's relationship. And I did not give a fuck.
It's terrible, but it's 1,000 times better than anyone else's relationship in this movie. Like Bryce Dallas Howard and Christian Bale as husband and wife with a baby on the way. There's no emotion there. They are mannequins. That's like the thing is, even as bad as that relationship like kind of is on paper, it's so much more than how completely flatlined everyone is. Like fucking Common shows up and it's just like, hey, what do you want us to do? It's a lot of people just gritting their teeth at each other like they're bad Clint Eastwood impersonators.
And that's another thing too, man. There was you guys just got to check out the director's cut. There's a lot of missed shit that if it were in it, I don't think you guys would be as sour on it as you are. I honestly don't. Because the whole thing with the Common character, my brother, it's Terry fucking Crews.
Yeah.
And he's in the beginning for a good 15 minutes. Like he's one of the guys who's leading the assault in the very sort of opening future thing. He's one of John's right-hand guys and all that. Like it would add a little more pathos to that character. It's just, there is, I will agree, a lot of missed potential in this movie. And you might be right on the whole, there's a gulf between, the second one to this one. And you're probably accurate. But I'd argue that there's also a gulf between this one and Genesis and 3. And maybe a big size like Great Lake between this and Dark Fate. But still, I fucking hate you guys.
Making me think about shit. How dare you? But no, I think that's the thing is that's the big problem with any of these. Even as someone like who I think Dark Fate is the better one, is like the only other of these sequels that I can like tolerate. It is still like a massive gulf, and I think it's because like all of these movies have so much problem with like, oh, we're kind of trying to build a bit more of a franchise like after this point, especially even like this movie you talk about like, oh, it's like not the exact future from like the we saw in the previous two movies, true, because it's 2018 as opposed to 2029, but it's so much of just like, oh, we're like laying the pieces down for the trilogy that we're planning. This was like peak example of like, oh hey, we're gonna build like a whole trilogy of like John Connor in the future movies. And the problem is when that doesn't end up being like an actual thing, when we don't see an evolution of this particular John Connor, this feels like a vestigial limb. It's just like, yeah, it's one part of like another story, but this story is incomplete, so it's fucking dumb.
Isn't that the exact same thing that happened with Genesis and Dark Fate? They were all supposed to be build-ups to a trilogy. They all
Right.
three, both of them were, and you know, they both don't work because of that. I'd argue.
I mean, I said that, like, that's the problem with, like, a lot of these movies, is that they're kind of trying to build, like, a bigger franchise, and all of them have that problem. I would just argue of, like I said, all the vestigial limbs, I find at least a bit more of, like, oh, there's some interesting cuticles on this one's finger in Dark Fate compared to the others. That's the thing, is, like, there's a huge, massive gulf between any of these. I've just, like, gun to my head, I'd prefer, like, a Dark Fate. Because I like the action a bit more, and I like a lot of the more of the character stuff they do with, like Linda Hamilton, and even the version of T-800. It's at least taking a bit more risks than I think even this one ultimately is doing. So, but you would say, despite all this, Mel, this is like your third favorite technically? Okay,
how do I word this? This is the least offensive of all the ones that followed Judgment Day. So yes, it's my third favorite Terminator. I'm all for you. I love writing serialized stuff. I love planning 3 movies, 5 movies whenever I write anything. But you have to make sure the first one works. You cannot lean on what you hope is coming. It's such a shitty way to write. And I want all of Hollywood to stop doing this. But obviously they're not going to, because there's always money in the banana stand. So let's just go for it.
Very true, very true. And I think that's why this one offends me a lot, not as much as a Genesis, because I think this idea has the most potential of just like following John Connor in the future. And I just think it's like we mentioned, like such a piss poor attempt that like when you do such a bad job at that on like the first attempt, it ultimately is like, oh, they're never going to try and do that again because they don't want to like chase that tail. So that's like what results in some of these other things that we get. I think that's part of also the problem with it. But we've been talking a lot also. We're running long. So let's go ahead and go into some final thoughts. Mel, final thoughts on Terminator Salvation.
You have changed my mind. I definitely want to chase down that director's cut. When we watched it last night, my fiance was just like, why is that like that? Who's that? And I just kept going, probably a deleted scene somewhere that explains that. So yeah, I think I will definitely give that a go. I think it will help me feel better about it. I don't loathe the movie. It makes me sad because I wanted it to be better. I wanted it to be more. But I wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which one fills up first.
Right.
That's true. My wisdom.
Very good summation. Adam.
I still think this is a pretty good movie, man. I think, to me, it has everything I kind of wanted from an offshoot Terminator sequel. I don't find it overly offensive in any way. But this is also coming from someone who's seen the director's cut and vastly prefers the director's cut to the theatrical one. So maybe I'm a little bit fucking jaded when it comes to that. I mean, I'm not David Caruso jade, but still, it's I think it's good, man. I think it's far from perfect. It's far from fantastic, but I think it's ultimately a pretty decent sci-fi action Terminator movie. I don't have a problem with the action editing as much as you do. Maybe both you do. I think it's perfectly fine. I love the look of the world that it's sort of building. I love the look of the T-600s. I love the look of the sort of robot bikes. I love the little callbacks they do, like with the Guns N' Roses song, and even John still got that same fucking thing he used to hack the ATM. I really do enjoy the movie.
Or when they stop the movie dead to say, "I'll be back." So great. So fucking great.
They
when
do
they do
that in all of them.
Yeah, and it's so bad here. It's always bad. So why are you doing it again? But no, yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I think this one it's like personally the second least favorite for me because of like how much potential this idea has. And even like I'm sure that director's cut does improve upon some things. But also, does it fix crucial problems like recasting Sam Worthington? Does it do like certain other big things like completely changing the look and vibe of this movie? I don't know.
Well, to be honest, the director's cut, Marcus is Tig Notaro.
Oh, well, that's very good. 10 out of 10, greatest movie ever made. but no, I just think like even it's interesting to note that you're saying the director's cut like adds all these crucial things that make it better, as opposed to like when like the James Cameron director's cuts like a T2 or other things, they add sequences that like aren't like crucial but just add a bit more flavor. And I think that's the big thing, is that like when the only thing you can add is like, oh, a bit of flavor that makes it a great thing even better. That's fine, but it's like, this is like I guess according to you, like this car that has like so much of its parts removed that like, oh, you guys see the part where like everything's actually on the car. That makes it better. Well, I just still say that like even then, most people saw this incomplete car. I saw this incomplete car, at least I've seen it 3 times now, and this incomplete car doesn't run very well. This incomplete car is not getting me to a good destination at all. And like we mentioned, is trying to get me to like, oh, don't worry, we're going to get on the road trip and we'll be able to get to like our final destination after like 3 legs. And after the first leg, they just kick you out and say, fuck you. That's what this fucking car is. That's what this car ride did to me. So like I said, Genesis is the bottom of the barrel because it's completely creatively bankrupt. As opposed to, there's some fun stuff like occasionally that pops up in here, like some of Stan Winston's last practical effects are in this movie. I like particularly the sequence where Anton Yelchin is fighting that one T-600. I think it's like one of the few good bright spots of this movie, or even some of the ideas that we're kind of talking about that it ruminates on. But when it all culminates in like this Mary Sue character who's like brings everybody together, and then it turns out like, oh, it looks like I was like a prototype that was sent to get John Carter here to this point. Our character's literally just like is a plot device. That's literally like his function in the universe. Just like, you were designed to get John Connor here to this point. That's lazy fucking writing. It's so fucking just like thin. It's just like, oh, what's the character's purpose? To get these other characters from point A to point B. Great. I don't give a shit. So yeah, not a fan. But before we go into our next segment, here is a message from the ESO network that we fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Hello everyone, Dr. Geek here with a shout out to all the scientists who worked tirelessly to bring a COVID-19 vaccine into reality. Let's face it, creating something of this magnitude is a miracle worthy of Dr. McCoy himself. And now, Dr. Geek needs you to do your part. Remember, each shot is one small step back to normal, one giant leap to putting the pandemic behind us. We can do this. For more information, visit vaccines.gov to find your nearest provider.
Alright, so we're doing now the double review, where every week Adam and I, and sometimes a guest, recommends and dissuades you from watching some movies that are similar to a movie that we're talking about, to the franchise or whatever like topic that we're doing. And in this case, as we've done with like episodes based around particular franchises, this is more about just like movies that are similar. We don't have to just make it like, oh, these 2 good Terminator movies, these 2 bad ones, but that can be included as well. So Adam, what are your 2 good movies to recommend, and 2 you would recommend everybody stay away from?
All right, so one of my good ones is a really sort of underseen horror sci-fi thriller done by Jack Shoulder, who did like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Alone in the Dark with Jack Palance. It's called The Hidden, and it's from, I want to say 87, 88, around there. And basically the plot synopsis is, there's like this alien parasite that hits LA, and it, infects people and turns them basically into Terminator robots. I mean, they're just relentless forces of nature, killing machines with devoid of personality and everything else. It is definitely a little bit more on the sci-fi horror angle, but it's totally like everybody in it is a Terminator, and it's pretty fucking awesome. Stars a very, very young Kyle MacLachlan. It's this sort of young FBI agent trying to figure out what's going on. It's just, if you can find it, it's great. I don't think it's available to stream anywhere right now. At least last time I checked, it wasn't. But it's a really sort of underseen gem. I can't recommend it enough. And then for my second one, I have the original Class of 1999. Pretty cool cast in it, like Pam Grier, Patrick Kilpatrick, Stacy Keach, I believe. It's really fun. It's really campy. It's one of those great movies where it's 1999, and you watch it, it's like none of this shit exists, especially the way everybody dresses, where, you know, they're all basically like kind of low grade Mad Max extras with cod pieces and makeup and feathers and all this stuff. But it's super, super fun and sort of enjoyable. And ultimately, you know, the three sort of teachers that come in are these horrible killing machine robots that sort of malfunction and start killing all the children or teenagers in this high school that's like in the inner city and whatever. But it's super, super fun, really campy, but also, I mean, it's a breeze to get through. It's just, there's so many cool practical effects. Some work really well. Some are just so laughably bad that it's like, it's worth a watch. And for my bad ones, I actually have Class of 1999 2, The Substitute, starring Sasha Mitchell from Step by Step as this sort of, is he or isn't he a robot psycho killer? It's so terrible. The action is atrocious. The sort of gratuitous sex scenes that happen a lot are just laughable. It's really, really ridiculous. And it sort of crescendos in this ultimate, like where they're playing paintball, but Sasha Mitchell is there with real guns. And it's just, just don't watch it. And then the other one I have is Solo, starring Mario Van Peebles. Oh boy. It's something to where, you know, Adrian Brody creates this robot and he asks him what he wants to look like, and he sees a picture of Michael Jordan and the robot goes, like Mike. It's atrocious. And then William Sadler is in it as the sort of bad guy, and he's, you know, doing the best he can with the material, but oof, if you haven't seen it, just, I mean, unless you are really into like self-torture, don't watch Solo. There's nothing good about it.
I'm sorry, I'm stuck at the AI quoting the title of a Bow Wow movie. That's astonishing.
Yup. He wants to look like Michael Jordan, but it's Mario Van Peebles. So, there you go.
Oh my god. Well, I will say I've been wanting to see The Hidden and even Class of 99. Those are definitely both movies that, whenever I was looking up movies to like potentially do for this, those were both like very high up, and especially The Hidden I've been wanting to see for years, but I'll definitely need to check this out sooner rather than later. I hadn't really known much about your two bad choices. You're kind of tempted me with Solo based on the like Mike.
Oh man, Solo's usually streaming somewhere, usually on like Tubi or Crackle or something. Like, it's one of those that's just dumped on garbage streamers.
Oh, so it's great cinema. Got it. Great cinema on Tubi TV. Gotcha. But yeah, so for mine, I have, for my two good picks, I have ones that definitely I think, one that inspired, I think, a lot of the stuff in particularly T2, and one that I think definitely took a lot from at least the first Terminator. And also is a sequel that improved upon its original. I have first, the original Steven Spielberg film Duel, the TV movie from 1971, that if you don't know, is basically stars this one character who finds himself being chased by a giant Mack truck. And I think especially, like, you don't see the actual driver or anything, and it's just this, like, robotic Mack truck that's chasing after this man for, like, 90 minutes or so. And I think it's an astonishing example, like, from an early point of Spielberg managing to, like, make so much menace out of such a, like, non-readable villain in this case. And I think it does a stunning job, especially any of the big sequences with the Mack truck in T2 were very clearly inspired by something like a Duel. That does such, like, an incredible job with, like, a very limited TV budget. And it's just, like, mainly a guy being chased by a truck in a desert and does, like, so much to, like, keep you on the edge of your seat. My second choice is, like I said, it's a sequel, but I think is the one that I think if you're gonna watch one of these, it is this second film in this trilogy. It is Maniac Cop 2, which, if you don't know, is basically about this police officer who is killed in the early part of the first movie and then comes back as sort of like a zombie, as played by Robert Zadar, the late, great Chin himself. And I think the first one is like a serviceable, fun, kind of like horror action movie. 2 ramps everything up. And it just, like, there's so many great, like, action beats. Particularly, there's an assault on a police station and also a jail in this movie from the Maniac Cop that are stellar. I think has legitimately some of the best low-budget, like, fire stunt work I've ever seen in a movie. Bruce Campbell shows up. There's a lot of great stuff. I would firmly recommend as sort of, like, the peak of very cheesy, sort of, like, exploitation film kind of stuff. Maniac Cop 2 is one to watch. And then my two bad ones are oddly ones I would kind of recommend on a so bad it's good level, I would say. These are both kind of fun to watch. One is Wes Craven's Deadly Friend, which, if you don't know, there's so much to Deadly Friend. We will talk about it at some point in the future on this podcast. But basically, it is the story of a guy who moves into town. He's a high schooler, and he has, like, all of his friends really... he gains a lot of new friends by showing up with his robot buddy, BB, who is just this robot he immediately comes into contact with, and it's just like, oh, he's like a ripoff of Short Circuit, and everyone loves BB. But BB is assaulted at one point, and then possesses his would-be girlfriend, who goes into full Terminator mode, quote-unquote, and is played by Christy Swanson doing the worst job possible of being menacing. It is a stellar, weird movie that combines so many different genre elements that, like I said, it is bad, but I kind of recommend you watch it. And then, in the same way, I have a clear Terminator ripoff from Indonesia called Lady Terminator, which, there's so much to go into with this movie. I'll just briefly say, it starts off with a flashback in which you witness the Queen of the Southern Sea, this ancient sex goddess, seduce a bunch of men, and it turns out she has a serpent in her vagina. And then, centuries later, in 1989, an anthropologist comes across her grave, and then is, like, possessed and turns into the Terminator. It's one of the craziest fucking movies I've ever seen in my life. I would firmly recommend, like I said, both of them are very so bad it's good. So, they're both bad, but I kind of recommend you watch all 4 of my movies to some extent.
I've seen all 4 of your movies, and I echo exactly what you just said. Everybody should see these movies. Lady Terminator. Dude. Fucking what? Like, that movie is batshit nuts. But it's kind of amazing. Like, it's bad, but it's great. And I mean, Deadly Friend, the fucing basketball scene. I mean, that just sells the whole thing.
Right, most people have seen the basketball scene.
No, I'm on board with all 4 of your choices. First time I've seen all 4 of your choices, by the way.
Well, Mel, what about your choices for the Double Radio?
Let's see. I went. This is my first time doing this, so I may have gone in a slightly different direction than I was supposed to. So there basically there are 3 elements going on in the Terminator franchise. There's time travel, there's robots, and artificial intelligence. So I'm leaning towards for my good choice. I'm leaning on Ex Machina from 2014. Starring Alicia Vikander, I believe is her name, and the guy that plays Poe Dameron. I think that's a really smart take on artificial intelligence, like what that would probably really be like when we get to that point. And it's terrifying too, not giving anything away for anybody who hasn't seen it. But that takes a very kind of Terminator turn that's enthralling. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. Going old school for just good old fashioned robot fun, RoboCop, Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop. I know you've seen it. I'll recommend that to anybody every day forever. It's, there's a statue of Sylvester Stallone as Rocky in Philadelphia. There needs to be a statue of RoboCop in Detroit. That movie's that good. It's this great kind of like satirical statement on consumerism and capitalism and corporatization and privatization. It's so sharp and stands the test of time remarkably well. So that's my second good pick. For bad picks, I'm kind of going to school on your throat with Solo, but my recommendation for a bad pick is the 1998 film Soldier, starring Kurt Russell, which is more of a Universal Soldier knockoff than a Terminator knockoff, but it's kind of in that wheelhouse. Kurt Russell plays in an apocalyptic future. It's this group of kids are like raised from birth and trained to be these emotionless killing machines. And over the course of the film, he gets like like drummed out, and he gets taken in by like these like Mad Max kids who teach him how to feel, and he like stands up for them and protects them against his own like other Terminator-like people. Jason Lee and his massive neck is in that as the bad guys. It's not great. It's directed by the same guy that directed the '95 Mortal Kombat. That one. So what's it?
Paul W.
One of the
Anderson.
Paul Andersons. Yeah, there you go. There's like 3 of those guys, but it's the bad Paul Anderson. So, yeah. Soldier for my bad pick, and for my second bad pick, the new RoboCop, because fuck that movie, absolute trash. You want to talk about a remake that completely misses the point of the original? That one has it in spades. That was somebody who saw the name RoboCop and they were like, hey, that's got brand recognition. Let's make a new one of those. Like, have you seen the original? No, let's do it anyway. Cop turns into a robot. Yeah, let's do that. It's so bad and misses the mark by such a wide margin. Those are my recs. Go watch those or don't. I don't care. Do what you want.
You did a pretty good job, I would argue, with like that succinctly fits the reduced style. Yeah. I would say, yeah.
I love both your good picks. RoboCop, to me, Thomas and I have talked about it elsewhere. I still think RoboCop might be the perfect '80s sort of movie, as far as the excess in violence and gore and sexuality and everything that was '80s cinema. RoboCop has it all, but it's also incredibly smart satire. That's RoboCop to me is a perfect movie, and I really dig Ex Machina. I think that's a fantastic film, and I like Soldier. I kind of like Soldier. It's super cheesy, but I can't help but like it. It does have Jason Lee's wide neck, but it also has Gary Busey's horse teeth. I kind of like that one. But yeah, the RoboCop remake is just fucking pure, just smegma. It's garbage. It shouldn't exist. What a fucking waste of money and time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think RoboCop is a perfect movie. And I would also say that I think Ex Machina is about as close as you can get to that. I mean, particularly the Oscar Isaac, who I believe you were trying to mention as Poe Dameron. His fucking dance is iconic. It's one of the top tier cinematic moments in recent memory. I haven't seen Soldier, so I can't weigh on that debate. And with RoboCop, the remake, I do agree it's bad. But I've at least more forgotten it as opposed to, I would still argue RoboCop 3 is worse. They're still both really bad.
Oh, I had forgotten that. I had pushed it completely out of my... Oh, it's back.
Yeah, it's there, isn't it?
Oh.
Let it fester there for a second, huh? Yeah. But still, RoboCop the remake, I agree, is very bad. It's kind of the epitome of like a dumb, bland, forgettable remake that would have come out around particularly that time in like 2014. It's a pretty dull. But, yeah, those are our recommendations and not so big recommendations out there for everybody. And so we'll get to the exit of our show and we'll do our picking at the very end, so stay tuned for that. But we want to thank some people first. We want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our great artwork. Follow him on Knight of Water. That's Knight like a noble knight with a K, _of_water, for all his great art. He's on Twitter and Instagram for that. And then also, thank you to our loyal patrons, our edgelord patrons over at patreon.com/GEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, y'all get to listen to a bunch of bonus podcasts we do and vote on polls for stuff that we cover. And right now, as when this is out, you'll be able to hear our On the Edge of Relevance, where we talk about F9, which I'm very curious. We still both haven't seen as of this recording. I'm very excited to see that and talk about it a bit further on there. And also, we would have recorded our top 10 character actors episode that will be out by probably the end of this week.
Yeah, that was the biggest undertaking we've done so far for Patreon, I'd argue. Even our sort of bracket thing we did about the movie villains, I had a harder time doing the character actors than I did that.
Yeah, there'll be a lot to talk about with that particular bonus episode. Like I said, you can listen to that for just $1 a month over on Patreon. But of course, we also want to thank our guest, Mel. Mel, thank you so much for coming on. Well, we loved having you on. Come back anytime. plug yourself, please.
So I am on Twitter at Tangent1985, where I say things from time to time. Occasionally they are funny. And I am on YouTube at the Tangent1985 channel, where sometimes we do deep dives on some of our favorite and least favorite movies. We have a couple of series there. We do a series called Best of the Rest, which features one great film from a director who only had one great film. We spotlight that. And there's another segment where we do one great scene and break that down from some of our favorite films. So yeah, check me and my writing partner and fiance Nicole out on our Tangent 1985 YouTube channel.
Yes, I would thoroughly recommend. Particularly, you did a great one on The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which I agree with you is a very underrated, underseen movie. And your video spotlights how wonderful it is as a film.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But for more of our rinky-dink operation over here, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook as @DEDBpod. And you can also email us doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out, for any kind of feedback you have for the show. If you want to support us and you don't want to be a patron monthly, you can just buy some merchandise with our logo on it over at the ESOT Public Store. That'll be down in the description. You'll be able to find the link to that, where you can buy a t-shirt or a mug or a tote bag with our logo on it, because it helps out since we get a bit of a kickback from that. So they should do what, Adam?
Buy our merch. Buy our merch.
Yes, I programmed him to do that every single time. He has to do it every week, and I love it. And for more of my own individual stuff, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com, and also film-cred.com, including, I'll just plug this one last time, we're recording this the night of Conan O'Brien's final broadcast, and I put out a little tribute thing talking about how much I love that dude, and it's a bummer that he's not on TV anymore, over at film-cred, film-cred.com.
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Atom or Adam. It's ATOM_OR_ADAM. As we're talking, this fucking guy, Tangent 1985, just followed me. I don't know who the fuck he is. But you can also... You can also find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON.
Yes, and for more of our antics, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on ESO, why not dig into all the other great shows on the network? Or also you can dig into our archives on our Podbean main feed, including about 60 or so episodes before we even started doing stuff with ESO. And nothing else, if you can't buy the merch or you can't support us on Patreon, the completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or share the show around, because that gives us more visibility. That gets more people listening to us and builds up the Double-Edged Double Bill resistance.
Yeah, I mean, fucking just share the goddamn show. It's not that fucking hard. I mean, wait, can't you take a second away from your fucking vaccine is blue lives and blah blah? Just fucking share the show. Actually, if you're talking about that stuff, don't share the show. I don't want to be a fucking jerk offs. But just hook us up, all right? If you're cool, we don't like cool people to listen to our show. You gotta be rad.
Yeah, cool people with empathy. That's the coolest thing you can have. But
morals.
But now, Adam, we gotta end this episode, and we'll be doing that by doing our picking. Like I said at the beginning, the way we do this is usually Adam and I each have two movies. Either someone has the two good movies, someone has the two bad ones. We assign them between 1 and 10 for each of our choices, and then either us or a guest picks number between 1 and 10, and that gets us a good and bad feature. Keeping in mind that the Godfather rule is in effect, where basically Adam and I, for a whole year, up until May of 2022, has the option to veto one either good or bad choice that we hear. The person will say this particular choice, and then ask the person who picked it, hey, do you want to take the cannoli? Hence the Godfather connection. And then the person who has the option to will either say, no, we'll go ahead and go with that choice, or actually, I will take the cannoli. Thus, the veto goes into effect. Though, that's not the case when a Patreon poll is used to pick one of our picks, as the case with Adam has the two bad choices. but our patrons ended up choosing our bad pick for non-MCU Marvel films because Black Widow's coming out. We figured let's revisit Marvel, but let's do it with the movies that aren't in a big interconnected universe. And our patrons ended up picking between Adam's two bad choices, the X-Men Dark Phoenix, and then the ultimate winner, which was Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer, which we will be doing. We cannot veto that particular choice. I have not seen either of the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies, so I'm very curious how that's going to go.
You're gonna hate your life.
Any more than now. Come on. The pit keeps getting lower. But I have the two good choices. I have assigned a number between 1 and 10 for them. So, Mel, if you will do the honor, please pick a number between 1 and 10 for my two good non-MCU Marvel movies.
9.
Okay. So we ended up with, at number 8, another post-apocalyptic movie. One that I would argue is probably the best of a very rocky franchise before Marvel got their hands on this property just recently and has yet to do anything with it. But I have Logan from 2017.
I can already answer your question. I will not be taking the cannoli because that movie's a masterpiece.
Yes. Good. But to be fair, on the other end of that, at number 2, I would argue another pretty good sequel. And one that I would say is pretty close to a masterpiece as well of these movies. I have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
Oh, shit. Damn. Win-win either way.
Yes, but Logan's still a win. So we'll be covering that and Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer next time. But until then, everybody, what the fuck are you doing? Putting your light in my way. Da-da-da-da-da. I had to reference the ring at some point.
Yeah, it's cool. Fuck Edward Furlong.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.